Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. The U.S. military plans to deploy the Typhoon mid-range missile system inside Japan during a joint exercise in September, and will conduct related project training. The mid-range system will be withdrawn after the exercise and training are completed. This joint move by the U.S. and Japan is clearly aimed at China. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson郭嘉昆said that China expresses serious concern. China has always firmly opposed the U.S. deployment of the Typhoon mid-range missile system in Asian countries. Deploying such a system in Japan will further undermine the legitimate security interests of other countries and pose a substantial threat to regional strategic security. The U.S. and Japan should genuinely respect the security concerns of other countries and must not lure the Typhoon mid-range missile system. They should take concrete actions to play a positive role in maintaining regional peace and stability.郭嘉昆also said that due to the history of militarist aggression, Japan's military and security developments have always been closely watched by its Asian neighbors and the international community. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War. China urges Japan to deeply reflect on its history of aggression, remain committed to the path of peace, exercise caution in the field of military security, and refrain from further actions that would betray the trust of its Asian neighbors and the international community. China also urges the United States to learn from historical lessons and focus its energy and resources on the right path, rather than the opposite. Meanwhile, as the U.S. continues to take various actions against China, Nikkei Asia reported on August 29 that U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has proposed a phone call with his Chinese counterpart, but China has yet to give a clear response. Japanese media, citing a U.S. official, reported that the U.S. hopes to arrange the call in early September, specifically after the military parade on September 3 commemorating the 80th anniversary of China's victory in the War of Resistance. According to Japanese media, while seeking military-to-military dialogue does not indicate a shift in U.S. policy, it does reflect efforts to avoid misunderstandings and helps lay the groundwork for a possible future summit between the Chinese and U.S. leaders. If the call goes ahead, it will be the first high-level military exchange between China and the U.S. since President Trump's second term began. According to the report, citing several current and former officials from both countries, the reason for China's cautious attitude is that it has yet to see a clear path to improving relations. At the Shangri-La dialogue held in Singapore at the end of May this year, Kejisai made a big fuss about the so-called China threat, trying to pressure allied countries to increase their military spending. He hyped it up, saying there was no need to sugarcoat things. The threat posed by China is real and could be imminent, so the U.S. and its allies must be prepared with a sense of urgency and vigilance. The U.S. should also be ready to fight and achieve a decisive victory. Sources said that Kejisai's rather aggressive rhetoric caught the attention of the Chinese side. In response to Kejisai's inappropriate remarks, a spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs said at the time that Kejisai ignored the calls from regional countries for peace and development, peddled Cold War mentality of bloc confrontation, smeared and attacked China, and hyped up the so-called China threat theory, which was full of provocation and incitement. China is strongly dissatisfied with and firmly opposes this, and has lodged a stern protest with the U.S. side. Sources also said that after U.S. Secretary of State Rubio met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Malaysia on July 11, the Pentagon began considering holding more military dialogues with China. The U.S. side regarded that meeting as constructive and pragmatic. The report pointed out that another possible channel to promote China-U.S. military exchanges is the Xianshan Forum, which will be held in Beijing next month. Smith, the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs, is considering attending the forum. Currently, the U.S. Embassy's defense attaché in China has confirmed attendance. Last year, Smith's predecessor, Sef, also led a delegation to the Xianshan Forum and held working-level talks with the Chinese side during the meeting. To sum up a few observations, first, from the Japanese media's reports, it is already clear that the U.S. has not changed its hostility toward China. If the call is only to avoid misunderstandings, but the U.S. remains hostile toward China, then there really isn't any misunderstanding to speak of. Second, on the other hand, it also reflects the U.S. military's usual stance: they don't want to, and don't dare to, have a direct confrontation with the PLA. In recent years, U.S. politicians have always played the same game, putting on a show by requesting meetings on one hand, while continuing to suppress China on the other, but at the same time worrying about things getting out of hand and being afraid of a direct clash with the Chinese military. Since China-U.S. relations haven't truly stabilized yet, there's really no need to rush into arranging high-level meetings between the two militaries. Third, the U.S. side has been leaking to the media that the PLA only reads but doesn't reply to their messages, trying to put pressure on China and make it seem like the U.S. is eager to ease tensions. But in reality, truly easing relations isn't about whether the two defense ministers meet or not, it's about the U.S. stopping its efforts to rally regional countries to contain China. That's the real solution. Besides the U.S. Secretary of Defense being anxious to meet with his Chinese counterpart, American farmers are even more eager. The annual soybean harvest season has arrived, but American soybean farmers aren't feeling happy at all. The Trump administration's stubbornness in provoking a trade conflict is making them bear an immeasurable and heavy cost. Reuters reported on August 29, citing two sources, that due to the ongoing China-U.S. trade conflict, Chinese soybean importers will increase purchases from Argentina and Uruguay over the next year to make up for the shortfall in U.S. supply. The report said that this time, the increased soybean supply from the two Latin American countries, combined with China's large imports from Brazil, will have a compounded effect, dealing yet another blow to American exporters. One of the sources is a trader from an international company exporting soybeans to China based in Singapore, and the other is a Chinese professional involved in soybean trading. They revealed that by the 2025 to 2026 sales season ending next August, Chinese processing companies may purchase up to 10 million tons of soybeans from these two South American exporters, a record-breaking amount. They added that China has already booked 2.43 million tons of soybeans from Argentina and Uruguay, with plans to ship them between this September and next May. According to data from China's General Administration of Customs, China imported 5 million tons of soybeans from these two countries between last September and this July. As the world's largest soybean importer, China is continuously reducing its reliance on American agricultural products. This increase in soybean supply from the two Latin American countries, combined with China's large imports from Brazil, will have a compounding effect and can be said to deal another blow to American exporters. Traders based in Singapore said that as China diversifies its sources of soybean supply, its demand for American soybeans will further decrease, which also helps strengthen China's bargaining position in the ongoing trade conflict. Normally, the fourth quarter is the key sales period for American soybeans, as newly harvested soybeans gradually come onto the market during this time. In previous years, by this time, before the start of the U.S. soybean harvest season on September 1, China would typically have already completed about 14% of its annual soybean purchases. However, this year, China has not booked any U.S. soybeans for shipment in the fourth quarter. Bloomberg noticed last month that the increase in Brazil's soybean production is causing American farmers to lose their competitive edge in the global agricultural market. As the dominant player in the global soybean market, Chinese buyers are now taking advantage of Brazil's record soybean harvest to ramp up their purchases. On the other hand, the U.S. soybean crop has fallen into its worst condition in 30 years during the traditional peak export season. Earlier this month, traders revealed that as the traditional U.S. soybean selling season approached, Chinese buyers placed their orders with Brazil and other countries instead. This year, U.S. soybean exporters may miss out on billions of dollars worth of sales to China. Traders say that by mid-August, among the soybeans already ordered by Chinese buyers, 1.575 million tons are scheduled to be shipped from Argentina and Uruguay in September, 660,000 tons in October, and relatively smaller amounts of 66,000 tons each in November, December, and next May. Since Trump sparked a trade conflict with China during his first term, China has taken measures to reduce its reliance on U.S. agricultural products in order to strengthen its own food security. According to Chinese customs data, the share of U.S. agricultural products in China's total imports dropped from 20% in 2014 to 12% in 2024, while Brazil's share rose from 14% to 22% over the same period. Another trader pointed out that China's increased soybean imports from Argentina and Uruguay are mainly due to two reasons. First, China has reduced its purchases of U.S. soybeans, and second, both countries have enjoyed bumper soybean harvests. According to data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Argentina's soybean production for the 2024-25 season is 50.9 million tons, up from last year's 48.2 million tons, and far surpassing the 25 million tons produced in the 2022-23 season. The data also shows that Uruguay's soybean production for the 2024-25 season is 4.2 million tons, an increase from 3.3 million tons in the previous quarter. Facing the continuous loss of large Chinese orders, American soybean farmers are growing increasingly anxious. On August 19, American soybean farmers urged President Trump in an open letter to reach a trade agreement with China as soon as possible in order to secure a commitment from China to purchase large quantities of American soybeans. In the letter, the soybean farmers warned that the cost of growing soybeans in the U.S. is rising, while the sales outlook is bleaker than ever. If a soybean purchase agreement cannot be reached with China, the U.S. will suffer serious economic losses. The conclusion is that American politicians are stirring up trouble with China, causing harm to the interests of American farmers. Even if a trade agreement is reached in the future, China is unlikely to purchase American soybeans on the same large scale as before. At most, it will only serve as a supplement. Because in recent years, U.S. policies have made it clear to the whole world, don't be overly dependent on the United States.